Was there ever a Christendom to begin with? Yes, there was. There definitely was a Christendom. It wasn't exactly perfect, but it definitely did exist. Um, when we say Christendom, what do we mean by that? Like, I think Christendom truly is the unification of church and state. Not a unification in the sense that the church and state are synonymous or they're one and the same, but a unification in the sense that they harmonize together for the good of the world, for the good of humanity. So you have the church influencing morality and thereby influencing the laws, because laws are based on morality, and the state enacting the morality of the church. That's basically what I mean by that. There have been different theological concepts for this. In the Western Catholic Church, or in the Western Catholic world, it was known as the sword of Peter, basically referencing the story in the gospel in which Jesus tells his disciples to sell their purse and buy a sword, and Peter says they are two swords, and Jesus said it is enough. One sword representing the church's theological authority, and the other sword representing the church's political authority. And so, therefore, the church, while dictating theology, also has an influence on the political conditions of a country, or on the political, or on the legislation, I should say, on a country. Now, I know that there is a similar concept in the Eastern Christian world, or in the Eastern Orthodox world, in which the church has influence over the state as far as morality goes. But that is Christendom. Once you separate those two and you make the state completely severed from any sort of ecclesiastical influence, then what you're left with is not Christendom, but what you're left with is Europa, right? The idea of Europe. And the idea of Europe really comes from, or really is a part of the legacy of the Enlightenment, that severing of the church away from the state. And from there, you have the concept of Europe. When in the medieval period, there really was no concept of Europe. There weren't people walking around saying, "I'm European, I'm pro-European, Euro defend Europe." People were They were a part of some kingdom in Germany. Maybe they were Swabian. Maybe they were Anglo-Saxon. Maybe they considered themselves from some area in, I don't know, in Cornwall. I don't remember. They were some part of some area of France. Like, I'm from this region of France. I'm a Breton. I am from Pomerania. I don't know. They would identify with the region that they were in. Once these and when they would fight for the count, they would fight for maybe a bishop, even they would fight for the pope, they would fight for whoever was paying them. But then as the Enlightenment, after the Protestant Revolution happens, the power of the church is greatly undermined, and the power of the church is actually completely non-existent in entire swaths of territory within the continent of Europe. Christendom has been halfway destroyed. But then you have the concept of the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment comes in, the separation of church and state. Now the church is stripped away of its legislative authority, of its political authority. Then what are you left with at the end of the day? What you end up with is just countries, nations. Some people, what you end up with is countries and nations that observe individual the liberty or the freedom of the individual to choose whatever religion he wants. That's what you end up with. And so the authority of the Catholic Church is greatly undermined. It's greatly crushed, because now they have no leverage. They have no political leverage. They can no longer tell people they no longer have the power to, for example, and they did this a lot in the medieval period, to tell people that they don't have to pay taxes to their lord, that they don't have to pay taxes to their king because their king is a heretic. Like, they don't have that authority any longer. It's gone. It's completely gone. So how could you call such a condition Christendom? It's impossible. It literally is impossible, because what you have is just a bunch of countries in Europe that are somewhat unified. I mean, eventually they all get unified by the late 1800s. I mean, you end up with the Europe that you see today. In the 1870s, Germany became a unified country. I think also in that same time period, or within the 19th century, you definitely see Italy getting unified as well. Before that, Italy was just a bunch of states. And then they get unified, and the Vatican refuses to be under the unification because it knows that if it does, it would be basically under the mercy of Rome, of the secular state. So it didn't want to do that. So the Vatican got its own government. But that's it. Vatican City is just it's a state by itself. It's a little island by itself. Has no political authority. Has no political influence. It has some theological influence in the only in the sense that it can influence its flock, and that's it. I guess you could say it does have some political authority or it has influence in the sense that it can tell its followers to do certain things or to believe certain things. And that would definitely influence the vote of the followers of that government's citizens. But that's not, it's not really absolute political authority. Kings don't fear the Catholic Church. Governments don't fear the Catholic Church anymore. So there is no more Christendom. And to call the Western world today Christendom, I think, is either the result of a lack of education on the history of Christendom, or it's just being deliberately deceptive, because you have people who know that it's not Christendom and they know the whole thing is not Christendom, but yet they're going to say Christendom in the name of some bullshit secular movement, which to me is garbage. So hope that answers. I don't even remember why I even started talking about this, but I had fun doing it. Oh yeah, somebody asked me, was there ever a Christendom to begin with? For those of you who are very interested in the life and death of Christendom, I suggest that you read the book Christendom Dying by I want to say his name is Mark Greengrass. He's a British professor. He wrote this book. I read this book in 2017. Let me look it up real quick. I don't want to give the wrong title, but Mark Greengrass wrote a book called Christendom Destroyed. That's the name of the book, Christendom Destroyed. I read this book back in 2017. It was a very, very good book for the most part. There are some liberal ideas in the book, but nonetheless, it does give you a really well-detailed picture of the death of Christendom and how it eventually just died in the 18th century. So yeah, if you want to understand, and in the beginning of the book, he takes some time to explain what Christendom is and how when Christendom is no longer there, what you end up with is Europa. That's what you end up with is Europe. What you end up with is nationalism. You end up with Italian nationalism, German nationalism, French nationalism. That's what you end up with. Before, it was Christendom. It was, we're under the church. Yes, we have a king, but at the same time, we're not completely under the king. We're also under the power of the Pope. And if the Pope tells me to stop paying taxes because the king is a heretic, or I don't know, the king is divorcing his wife or something because he wants to bang some Spanish mistress, then I don't have to pay taxes to him. That was Christendom. It wasn't complete loyalty to the idea of a tribe or an ethnicity or a nation. It was loyalty to the king as long as he was loyal to the church. So there was this huge balance that was extremely vibrant in medieval Europe. And if you no longer have that, then how could you? Then really, what do you have left? What you have is a state that's going to make you pay taxes no matter what. The church can't come in and intervene. If the king is a heretic, or if the prime minister or the president is a heretic, and the parliamentarians are pedophiles, you're still going to pay taxes to them because they have the power of the state. There's no church that's going to intervene for you. So you can't really call what we have today Christendom. And if anyone does call it Christendom, they're extremely uneducated, or they're just dubious, and they have some stupid ass nationalistic message that they want to spread out. We have to fight Western Civ. Christendom is dying, when Christendom has been dead for hundreds of years. So yeah, it's crap. If you get rid of the church, what do you have? You just have states. And what do you have with the state? Well, you have no religion because there's a separation between church and state. So what is the state? What type of ideology is the state going to utilize to make sure that people are loyal to the state, and people are going to be willing to fight for the state? Well, you need nationalism. That becomes the religion of the land. So or some, you know, but again, you can have a healthy form of this in patriotism, right? You can have patriotism, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just giving you the plain truth of what we have. I'm telling you why we can't call it Christendom. That's what I'm telling you guys. Anyway.